So I am Hussein Chalayan. I'm the professor here from Modeklasse, and it's the first time I'm actually interviewing somebody else. Often I'm the person that's being interviewed, and so it's it's a new experience for me. As you all know, part of our job is to really share with you knowledge and insight about our industry, and it's very important for us to bring in experts to share with you their experiences and their lives, so you can learn from people that are actually in the fashion industry and their experiences and their thoughts on what is happening now. So today we're really lucky to have Sarah Mower. You may know Sarah Mower from over the years. She is an MBE, which is this title you get given by the Queen of England, which is a very important honorary title for services in the fashion industry and as a fashion journalist. She is the US chief critic for US Vogue chief critic for Vogue Runway, and she reviews shows, she interviews designers internationally, whilst working on, at the same time, supporting new designers. She is, in a way, a sort of advocate for young designers, working with the British Fashion Council in London. Sarah is a very important voice in our industry, in the sense that before Sarah, there was never really anybody that would discover young talent and mentor them throughout their careers. So it's actually, relatively a new idea. And maybe before Sarah Mower, there was, you may have heard of Isabella Blow, who would abstractly discover people and support them, but it was never supported by an organization like British Fashion Council. It was very much done on an individual basis. I would say that one of the few of the most important people that Sarah has discovered has been people like Christopher Kane, Erdem, J.W. Anderson, Roxanda, Peter Pilotto, Simone Rocha, Marques Almeida, Craig Green, etc. And Sarah is also chair of the New Gen Committee in London, which again, I guess is connected to discovering young talent and nurturing them and sponsoring them, etc. Just to give you a little bit of background before we go into the questions, and we will also open questions to the public, to yourselves as well afterwards. So Sarah studied English and History of Arts at Leeds University. She's a visiting professor at Central St Martin's in London. She's an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Art, honorary doctor at Westminster University, doctor of letters at the Academy of the Arts University, San Francisco. She was, as we said, also given an MBE for her services as a fashion journalist in 2011. So the reason to invite Sarah is I've known Sarah for nearly 24 years or so, which is really the time that I've been a designer in London. I wasn't a designer that Sarah discovered as such, but Sarah has been part of also my journey in a very, very big way, and she's written in our book, and I've known, how could I put it, like she's been a very strong supporter. And so I'm going to start asking a series of questions, and it will be organic, and like I said later...
This is role reversal, he's saying. It's usually me asking you questions.
Yes, it is a reversal.
And I've not been interviewed before on stage.
Oh, really? Yeah, because normally Sarah is the one interviewing. So I think one of the first things to ask you about is, like, how did this whole thing come about with you discovering young designers like the names we mentioned, and how did it really, how long ago was it that it started?
Well, it was a definite time when I stepped over the line. It used to be that, and possibly still is, with most fashion journalists, you're at a remove, and you're a critic, and you don't get involved. But there came a crisis in British fashion around the time that after you slightly established yourself, it was in the late 90s, with the same time as Alexander McQueen. Believe it or not, I was quite young myself then, I was still kind of in. What I saw was that your generation were leaving London, not necessarily leaving to live, but leaving to show in Paris. And the British Fashion Council at that stage, I would go into people's studios, and my whole thing as a journalist is I can't bear not to know what's coming next, because I think it's most important to find out what the next movements are, what young people are saying. So I would go and see people working in their homes and their studios if they had them. I knew what their problems were. And the British Fashion Council had this thing called the New Gen Sponsorship Committee, and all they would do to select was to have a lot of the older generation of journalists and some buyers around this table, and they would have people, not even the designers, just people bringing in, actually girls who worked there, bringing in things on hangers, so saying this is the designer's clothes, and these people would say yes or no, and they'd be drinking wine at the same time. So nobody knew who the designers were and what their problems were, and I started to get very kind of agitated about this. And I said, look, you've got to have somebody, you've got to hire somebody to go and be a scout, you've got to go and, because you're doing a really bad job. And in the end, they said, okay, well, you do it then. And so...
you never thought of it as yourself in the beginning. You just thought it had to be done, but you didn't necessarily think it should be you.
Because I knew it was no, because I didn't imagine that I could do that sort of... It's a role I made up. Mm.
And so just to kind of tell you, when we talk about the British Fashion Council and these kind of very local terms, like you might think, why are they talking about British Fashion Council? So, because this is like the equivalent of the Syndical in Paris. It basically makes all the decisions about what happens in London Fashion Week, who are the designers that show, etc. And in the years that I was a young designer, British Fashion Council was a very ineffective institution. Maybe tell us a little bit about how the BFC became a bit more powerful. What was the turning point, you think, where they became a bit more effective and they started to actually help designers?
Well, it was when the lights were going off in London Fashion Week, and I mean, it always takes a community to make something happen. There was a kind of, I won't say there was a palace coup, but there was an amazing woman called Hilary Reaver who became she worked on the British High Street, became the chairperson, and it was me. An incredible woman called Jane Shepperson, who was at the brand director at Topshop, who was the sponsor, and Karen Downey, who's somebody who knew about manufacturing. And so I have to say it was a cabal of us women doing things voluntarily and saying we're going to change this and make it. But we had this, I didn't dare think we had a vision, but we did one day get together and say every single capital has to have something special about it. So Milan has the industry, Paris has couture, New York has New York, you know, the mass market and ready to wear, I suppose. What did London have? Well, London has always had youth because we've had this incredible system of art schools, which is a national asset now being eroded. It was our ambition to make it the platform for young emerging talent for Europe, or for the world. And we dared say that, and then we kind of made it happen over a long time, I have to say.
So London does have the youth culture and the pop culture, all of this. But what is your feeling about the education system in the UK that you think stands out from the rest of the world and Europe and etc.?
I think in Britain there's a culture of individuality. I think in American education, for example, teaches people to be like someone else so that they can go and work in a massive industry, to make a sweeping generalization. Italy doesn't seem to care because they have family businesses, I mean, historically, and industry. Paris doesn't seem to care because it has it all. Oh, no, it does care, but no, Paris has organizations that people can stay in for life. So, you know, if you go into LVMH as a kid, you can come out at age 60 with a very nice pension. So there hasn't been that entrepreneurial thing. So in Britain, we have this combination of art education, individuality, often waves of music, and just no rules, really. I don't know. What did you feel when you came to London?
Well, I grew up in London. I came.
Yes, I know,
young.
but went to art school.
Yeah,
I
I went to St. Martin's, and before that, I did a foundation, etc. But I think that another thing to say about London really is probably that once you graduate from London University or a UK university, you could be celebrated, but you don't necessarily get jobs in the UK. And often I find that a lot of the British designers are getting jobs outside London. Why do you feel this is happening? That you go to a lot of houses and you meet a lot of...
Well, because they're fantastically qualified, I think. I think there's a huge competition between students in a good way, because everybody's an individual and people compete, and the bar is set very high. And also there's a culture of skills as well. And I think people know about fashion. They have an idea of what the future can be. So I think that kind of creativity is there. But I mean, I wouldn't say by any sweeping stretch of the imagination that everybody's British, but I know that, you know, Calvin Klein, there are British trained designers all over the world, yeah. And also, we don't have big industries. Apart from Burberry, we don't have big brands in the UK.
Okay. So I'm going to move slowly towards how you discover designers and how you nurture them. So, you know, the obvious question is, what ingredients do you look for in a designer? What do you think is important?
Well, as old as I am, I want somebody to surprise me, first of all, because in every time there are different circumstances, there are different waves of things that matter, different politics. I think I've always seen fashion as a medium for saying things. It's a reflection of society in real time. That's what I'm really interested in, but I'm also interested in who the individual is. And so is that person articulating something, can be something very micro that they're very good at, or it might be something just very sweeping, or it might be something very connected to their generation. This is one thing I really do look for, is are you speaking for yourself and who you know? I'm always quite suspicious, well, just not... I'll kind of switch off when I see somebody who I think is designing a fake collection, an imaginary collection for a lady or a man out there who's not the person. Because if you're not talking to, you know, if you don't actually believe in your clothes and you don't wear them, or you can't imagine anybody wearing them other than this fantasy lady, I don't see the future in that. Something else I also look for is, because often I'm dealing with people who really want to have their own labels. And in that circumstance, it's always the family behind them. And I'm not talking about wealthiness of, family at all. I'm talking about who your gang are, and are you practical? So, I mean, Christopher Kane had his sister Tammy, Erdem has his sister Sarah, and his boyfriend he met at at the RCA, a whole cohort have come up together. J.W. Anderson has his brother in his business. It's not, I don't think that you can't be a genius on your own, but if in fashion, as you know, it's a very, very practical thing. You have to have people with other skills around. So maybe it's a granny who can knit, or it's a mother who does the books, or a father, sorry, this is very sexist now, who can build the set. The sister who can build the set. Literally, I've seen that in so many, including Helmut Lang, who had a whole gang around him who got on the bus from Vienna and drove to Paris to show in the first place.
And talking about, let's say, designers who, you said you have a lot of designers around you that want to do their own brands. How about other skills in fashion? How about other ways of succeeding in fashion apart from just being a designer? And what are your thoughts on this? Like,
well, my thoughts are, when people jump up in front of me and say, I've just graduated, I'm just dying to say, what do I say, don't. I say, go and work for somebody. And if you really can't put them off, then perhaps I'll help them. My thoughts are that there are far too many fashion design students educated, and it's a problem in our country. I can't even imagine how many thousands there are. I'd be scared to count, let alone across Europe and the world. The trouble is that I think that careers in fashion are not visible enough. Fashion industry doesn't do a good job to show now where the skills gaps are. So in pattern cutting, in merchandising, in production, in everything to do with e-commerce, that's massive. People who, having people who can manage your own e-commerce business is something that a designer really needs, an independent designer. And there's this whole spectrum of jobs. So. And then there's PR. There's people who, if you're really good at selling something, and you're enthusiastic and you can make friends for a designer, that's a job. That's a massively important job. And then there's, photography, video making now.
Styling. Katie Grand was a fashion student in my year.
Was she?
Yes, and she became...
Apparently she did knitwear, yes. Failed at that, but look at her now.
Yes. She used to knit everywhere, like those people on the tube. She would knit even, while we would have lunch. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you also about designers who are not so talented, but who are good communicators and who are good at working with other designers who are talented. This is a very important point.
Well, I think they are talented, as you say. They're just differently talented. They're talented in a way that is super important now. Yeah.
But it's about the designer who isn't talented creatively, but talented in terms of knowing another talent that they can work with.
Well,
this is the point.
I don't think you can manufacture these things. I agree. I believe in movements and friendship groups, and people helping one another. So. The people who I know who are successful now met all their people, their gang, at college, and you grow up with them. That happened to you, right? No, you're more on your own.
I didn't really have a business. I didn't really have a gang. I built my gang.
Yes, well, exactly.
Yes, but yes, definitely. Like you said, they were different. Everyone had different roles, and they were happy to be in that role and to be part of something and to build a brand. Definitely. But I think my question, I guess, is that you can develop your skills in various ways. So you could be a leader, you could be a good communicator, and you can still succeed as a brand without you knowing even how to draw. And this is the thing, that this is another kind of skill we're talking about. And this is becoming, I guess, another way of working. That it's not necessarily you drawing, you draping, but you being the face of the brand, but you have other designers that work for you. And this can happen also to a younger generation of people, not only someone who is older. So this was the point, I guess. And then, so moving on to how you you know, select your designers and how you look after them and work with them. You probably become a bit of a family with them in a way. I mean, in a way, I think one thing that I heard some people say is that they have ideas, they're skilled, but they are not good networkers, and they're not good. They're not good socially. They're shy, or they don't like going out. How do you feel about this? What's important in your? What's important? How is it for you when you hear about a designer that's? Well,
I've never met anybody at a party that I'm. That's not the way I find people.
There are designers that say that they are not good at networking. They're not good at going out. They're not good socially.
Well, everybody can do Instagram. That's all completely changed now.
So you think it's digital media is the answer?
Well, I do find a lot of people on social media. Yes, I found designers in Iran, in Georgia, all over.
Places that
all over the place. Yes, and I mean that's what I want to do now. I mean, I don't see myself as Africa. I found some guys in Johannesburg, which is so exciting, and Nigeria. I see fashion as you have to look at. You can't just keep looking in one place because there's always something else happening over there. And now Instagram widens out your field so incredibly in extraordinary ways. And you know, everybody who's talented visually can do a great Instagram. That's the way to connect. And I must say, I mean, since we've also had another. Every time you think that something's going okay, something else goes wrong in life, and the British government brought in very high fees recently. So we started an education foundation for scholarships, and it's not just me, but I have a panel of people who interview people pre-BA, and now. I must say, you do check out people's Instagrams and what's on them, so you need to be, I'd have to tell you, you've all got very professional Instagrams, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I guess the other sort of side of this question is, so if you're a designer who has ideas and who's ambitious and driven, but let's say, okay, you mentioned digital media, Instagram, all of this. You can meet people through this, but we were talking earlier about going out and being social. And how important do you think this is in fashion, to be a social person and a communicator, and the personality of the designer? How often?
I think that. Well, you can't manufacture a social scene, can you? I mean, we were talking earlier about the club scene in the 90s. I was having children. You were out clubbing, and it was a great scene in London at that point. The point about clubbing is that it often generates a mode of dressing. I mean, if you look at the history of street style, I mean. When I was young, it was a Blitz club, and that was everybody would, you know, the Stephen Jones and Lee Bowery and Susie Sue and all that generation would spend 3/4 of their week at Central St Martin's making clothes to go out in. That in itself that is fashion. I mean, that's quite a sort of basic thing to say, I think.
But I think it's very important because sometimes, you know, I think some students don't go out enough, and some, you know, there are various reasons. But yes, I think this is part of evolving. You see how people dress, like you said, movements, all of this. So. The other question, I guess.
But I think you can find people who are like you through social media. You can form communities which aren't necessarily.
Yeah,
right
it's a new way.
There. I mean, I see that with young feminists now. It's extraordinary with kids who can communicate and share their feelings, and although they may not be meeting in real time, that's healthy. That's. But also, you see the culture of festivals now,
definitely,
which does bring people together.
And just to slightly move away from that, I want to ask you about the insecurity within fashion and people that study fashion. Do you have thoughts on people that are insecure in fashion that sometimes use maybe the dress code as a way to contradict that, or as a way of coping, maybe even? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, fashion's an armor.
It is a mask and an armor in a way.
Yes.
Maybe not so much of a mask, but it's an armor.
Yeah, and it's you can form your identity perform your identity through fashion. That's what. Yes, that's one of the. It's a very good way of putting it. Perform. Yes.
Okay, and the other thing was, like, what do you think is the best way of creating a movement for a designer? Because you talk about individuals in London, which means that everybody's quite different, but yet they have something in common that unifies them. So in your mind, or in your opinion, like, what do you feel is the best way of creating a movement, even with a set of individuals?
Sharing. We talk about everybody being so different from one another, and that actually has been the massive advantage, apart from being taught mainly by Professor Louise Wilson, who sadly died. It's her anniversary tomorrow, 4 years ago. She had a boot camp. It was like walking through fire. She taught the MA at Central St Martin's for a long time, you know. Yeah. And I think it was so traumatizing to do that course that people came out like, you know, fellow soldiers in the end. And when they started their businesses, they were friends, because this didn't happen in your time, because I think designers were much more isolated in your cohort from one another. This generation share manufacturers say they warn each other about bad buyers, bad payers, about what to do in many ways. And meanwhile, we at the British Fashion Council know all the minefields. So we advise on trademark, we advise on kind of legal problems, and help people get connected with manufacturers, that sort of thing.
So in a place like Vienna or other capitals in Europe, this system doesn't really exist that you're talking about quite in the same way. So how do you imagine that young designers, it's a very simple question, but how do you feel they should be supported where there's no system?
Well, we didn't have any support until the Topshop came along and decided that they wanted to get cool. You were involved in this because Topshop, I don't know if it means anything to you now. It used to be the absolute pits of the pits. Yeah. A horrible place in Oxford Circus, and the managing director asked, it was an American man, he asked me as a journalist if I would come in and consult, because he wanted to get young designers in to do capsule collections. And all the designers would say, absolutely no, they're going to rape us, they're going to copy our clothes and sell them all over the place. Anyway, Hussein was the first person who was persuaded to come in and do this collaboration. You were the very first.
Because I needed the money.
Of course you needed the money.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Well, so then it can become a win-win situation.
Absolutely.
So at that point, then I brought in several other designers, and then Topshop jumped up and they said, "Well, we want to show in London Fashion Week," and we said, "No way, you're a high street brand." However, if you give your space free to the young designers, we might consider it. And so they started to do that, and as well as sponsoring the scheme. And for a while, it worked very well, because they got loads of kudos out of it, and they gave lots of money. We laid on hospitality, shows, and so on. So, I mean, but that was then. I mean, I don't know if you have in Austria any companies who would see it as as a good idea to sponsor arts in general. It always has to come from the culture. You can't just say, I don't think what we've got is transferable to
another culture
necessarily. Yeah. And maybe, I mean, the idea of having fashion weeks everywhere is not a good idea. I think from the point of view of a journalist, people really want to know if there's one or two or three people working together. So the Belgians, for instance, they were really the first to form a society together and brand themselves. There used to be a bus driving around with promoting the Belgian fashion organisation. They had showrooms and all that sort of thing. So, yeah.
And okay, let's go back to the life of a designer, because obviously you're very familiar with that, and you know all the hardships that young designers go through. And actually, you know what, I have to say, we are living in an age of, in my opinion, not enough empathy for especially young people. I think empathy is very important.
I have to say, it really disgusts me when people talk with scorn about millennials and Gen Z. I absolutely hate that so much because, well, first of all, it's a marketing man's thing. And secondly, it's so wrong because I find this generation the most ethical, the most political, the most socially aware and kind. And, you know, it really, really drives me insane when I hear people, it's normally people who are employing people, not employing people, giving interns work without any money and calling them snowflakes. So yes. Sorry, that was one of my high horses.
Well said. I think that was a really good, well said. I'm really happy to hear that. And we have quite a few millennials here. And but what I wanted to ask you about was, I guess, also in the life of a designer, that we know how hard it is, and we know that it's a journey that not everybody chooses. What do you feel is the best way of sustaining interest in your brand? I mean, there's this thing called the 7-year itch, where you've been a designer that was well known and people were excited about your brand, and there comes a time where other designers take over a bit, and you start to.
I honestly don't know, Hussein. I mean, hats off to you. You are an absolutely, you know, you're one of the very few who is now here after 20 years doing something that's so relevant and modern and successful. Yeah, one of the very few. But when you look at the state of the industry now, if you look at what's happening in luxury groups where a designer gets a 3-year gig if they're lucky, I mean, the impermanence has become absolutely shocking, let alone what might happen to all the young designers, all the designers who work for that person, the movement between houses. I think if you want to go into it, you need to know that insecurity is a fact, and you're going to have to find your centre and your job satisfaction from a portfolio, from a patchwork career. Most people are freelance.
Very important point.
So I mean, it is what it is.
So if you were to suggest to your children, like if you were to advise them on studying fashion, what would you have said the pros and the cons are? Like,
who's saying I'm blessed, nobody wants to do it. What would I say? No, I would say, given that, well, my daughter who's at university is studying animation at the moment. That in itself is an opportunity that can be illustration and animation can be applied to the fashion industry. That's a you can get fashion clients through that. I've got a daughter who's quite business minded, and you know, that's Maisie. She could be a business manager and a PR for maybe a group of designers. I don't know. The thing is that the whole landscape has changed. It is changing. It's in absolute uproar at the moment. And I mean, I find it very interesting to see what young designers and young people are doing in the UK now and wherever I go. Sustainability, and that's a big and generalized and contentious word, but that's all they care about, and they care about ethics. They've grown up in the time of overconsumption of H&M and Primark and Rana Plaza and just waste, and I think that I'm really interested in how I see there are quite a few people who are not living in London who are producing on a very small level, don't want to grow hugely, just want to have quite a nice life. They don't have the ambition to be wholesaling around the world, and they don't have a fantasy about, having yachts and mansions. They are the ones who will be changing things, because I think eventually the big conglomerates will be having to look at what they say. I'm being idealistic here, but I think there's a whole new pattern erupting amongst young people who won't work. I know actually quite a lot of young designers who have worked in big houses and won't do it anymore because they've been treated so badly.
Well, I've been there too. Yes. And I guess my last question, and then we can then open questions to the audience, is, generally speaking, what would you say has been the biggest difference in fashion since you first started and now? I don't mean this, I know it's a thesis, but just in general terms.
For one?
Well, a few.
Well, I mean, I've lived through an industrial revolution. I mean, when I started working, it was typewriters, and then it went on to faxes, and then eventually we got computers, and print media, which I started off in, is teetering, and now it's all on. Everything's online. Everything's online. From the point of view of young fashion designers, I have to say that I started off writing for Style.com, which was in the year 2000, and at that point, the company used to have to beg designers to be able to allow us to go into shows and report their collections, because we put them online the next day. Now, of course, there isn't now a single designer or brand that doesn't want to be on VogueRunway.com. But that did change things. It changed things for, I've been going on about the sponsorship of British Fashion Council. What actually happened was this industrial revolution took place. The internet came along, and so designers didn't need to go to Paris to show anymore. They could show in London and be seen and reviewed on a par with Miuccia Prada and Versace and Calvin Klein the next day. So that is what changed in tandem with e-commerce coming along.
We used to wait for 6 months to see images of our work in collezioni. And it would be the most exciting thing, these glossy images of your work, because all the other photographs would be so shit from someone's camera. These were the only decent photographs of your work. But what I want to add to what you're saying is, because I'm a designer that went through this difference between the from non-digital to digital, was in the past editors would decide how they presented you in magazines.
We would select.
Yes, exactly. So you would be, in my case, because you were not a stylist, you were a writer, but the stylist would choose most avant-garde pieces from me and then present me and Alexander McQueen in a very avant-garde way, because this was how we were projected in the press editorial. When the digital era came, people can see everything you could do, so in a way made it much more democratic. And like Sarah says, you were not only seen where you were based, you could be seen in other countries. This was a massive difference.
And bought too. Because e-commerce came.
Yes, exactly. And then when you were reviewed, you would wait for ages to hear about what people thought about your collection. Now people can see your collection and they write about it before you even leave the venue that you've shown in. So this has been the biggest difference.
It's really changed my life.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that was quite insightful, I hope, I think, personally. Shall we? Should we, please, can we have some juicy questions? And no shyness, please, because it's a really good opportunity to have Sarah here. So any questions? Go ahead. Do you want to have
No, I've never literally, put the words I and me in I just physically can't do it. It's really, of course I think about this a lot. I try not to make it too subjective because I think the difference between my generation of journalists and others, I won't say it just generational. Just, my point of view is I don't like something because it fits me or I think that I could wear it. I mean, that would come down to like two designers. My criteria are what's this person saying? Is it relevant to anybody that is in the world? Actually, I don't care if it doesn't sell, really. And also my other criteria is what would someone reading me get out of it? What am I there for? What am I actually meant to say? About what can I contribute now? This has changed because anybody can review, and they do from pictures anywhere in the world. You don't have to be there to say what you think about a collection. If I have time, and I don't really have time, but I think I need to, one of my responsibilities is to say what it was like actually there, what the atmosphere was like, because I'm in the room. These days, there are massive distractions that houses in particular throw in your way. So the sets and celebrities and entertainment and parties and cruise ships and you end up like, is that the important thing to write about, or is it the clothes? And you have to make these decisions now from the moment you leave the show, perhaps having spoken to the designer, and you're meant to do it in 3 hours, and by that time you're in another show. So it's the time that's changed, but I don't think that I've changed my point of view journalistically.
You wrote about the clothes. You always prioritize the clothes.
Yes.
Not the cruise ships.
All the celebrities.
Can I just add one question? Because now we're talking about them. So we used to say bloggers, but now we say influencers. How do you think their future is going to be? How do you think that this is going to evolve? Because I wonder, are they going to be around in 5 years, or are they going to disappear, or is the industry making space for a new role?
People who are really good at what they do and carve out their own careers and their space are the ones who will last. I mean, look at Susie Lau is somebody I really totally and utterly respect. She's a journalist, and I don't know. People used to call her a blogger. I've heard her now introduce herself on a panel, actually only last week, calling herself, saying, "I'm Susie Lau, I'm a writer, fashion writer." So she's a shining example of somebody who came out of that kind of blogosphere time. Influences. Well, it's something that, again, I've got to say that it was young women who started this, and you have to approve of that. And it very, very swiftly started to be its own industry, its own sphere, which I don't know enough about. So no. Anyway, there are more. No, there are more people who are called influencers of a wider spectrum now of humanity. So shape, age, gender, colour. You can see all that there. I don't know how long it'll last.
Any other questions? Christopher.
Do you think there's a lack in creativity at the moment, especially in the bigger brands? Because I somehow have the feeling that young designers are very creative, but bigger brands barely rely on young designers anymore, and they all just switch in the bigger brands.
Who's setting the agenda? I think that's an interesting question, isn't it? I really feel compassion for design, for the heads, creative heads, if they're not, because when you take, I think it's become more like the music business. So houses are the stages, and they hire the stars only for a gig or two, and they have to gig all around the world because they have to go and open stores. They have to do, celebrity liaison, and then they have to design, 10 collections a year or something. So if people, that's not a road to creativity, is it? It's you literally don't. I mean, as a designer, have any time to design, I would have thought. So, yeah. I mean, of course, I'm always on the side of the people who are coming up.
Part of the allure of fashion is disloyal, actually.
Disloyal? Well,
it's an industry, it's not loyal. That's why you have these stages that you hire designers for a few years and then let them go, not caring what will happen to them afterwards. But I think the important thing here is that within the industry, you have got individuals, i.e. yourself, who do look after designers, and they're just missing more of those individuals, and we'll be in a much better place. But there's just not enough of them right now.
Sarah Mower is amazing at Italian Vogue. She's absolutely everywhere.
There are individuals,
there are prizes now. The LVMH prize is something that's really kind of amazing, because we actually I'm associated with it as well. It's an open call, really. You can anybody from it's a global thing, so people can apply online. You get really good. The most important thing is the mentoring, though. You get money. It's the mentoring. You should always look for prizes which have mentoring and that you don't have to actually spend money to go into. For the graduate prize.
LVMH prize.
Yeah, that's good.
It stands out though, because it's not that it's definitely not so many of them, and it does stand out. Our students, quite a few of them are applying for it, and they're coming to see our students' work as well for their graduation from LVMH.
Great.
Next question. Are you coming to our show?
Hussein, have you invited me?
Sarah's come so soon before the show.
Yeah, we should have dovetailed it. But I don't need to see shows. This is actually one of my things. I'd much rather meet designers, and I've met you.
There's a question at the back, please.
I was wondering if you observe the scene of young fashion designers Can you hear me? Yeah. What's the thing that surprised you most recently in a positive way, that you thought like this is that thing that I was looking for but I didn't expect it? Like, let's say it could be the second great name in the business, let's just give him or her a while. And on the other hand, if there is some kind of, let's say, common mistake that a lot of young designers do and they could avoid it, if there is something like this.
Well, as I said, I'm really, I wouldn't say optimistic because I'm a pessimist by nature, but encouraged to see your generation and the way you're operating. I recently met this boy called Paolo Carzana. He's just graduated from Westminster, and I thought, God, he's actually of the level of you and Lee. And the incredible thing about his collection, which is very, very emotional, and it's about male power, really, and in a negative way. His entire collection is vegan, and he has made it out of pineapple leather and natural dyes, and all that, but it does not look like a sustainable collection. So he's somebody that I think is just extraordinary. He may be an artist. I mean, it may actually not be fashion. It may be something in between fashion and art. This is another thing, hybrids are happening. Pitfalls. Do you mean a pitfall if you're trying to be an independent designer?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is one terrible, terrible, terrible pitfall which you wouldn't know, which we have to warn everybody about in the British Fashion Council, is that there are these people called IP squatters in China. And the minute that somebody's name comes up on the London Fashion Week, website, even if they're students, their names get registered in China, and it's not about copying, it's about holding your brand name hostage, so that you are not allowed to trade in China, because the person who owns your name is the actual person, and the only way that you can start operating to sell in China is to buy it back. And as the more money, the more successful you get, obviously the more the money goes up. So a very basic thing, and unfortunately it's a necessity, is that you have to be able to buy your trademarks, register your trademarks very early on. It's horrible, isn't it?
Another question? No more questions?
No.
I can have another one once I have the mic. Because you also said that fashion is saying something, and I wonder what's the message that you notice right now? What is the fashion world trying to tell us? Because for a non-fashion person, it's just, some kind of huge celebrity business. It's all about beautiful clothes, very expensive. So going behind that from an insider view, what would be the message that you see that the fashion world is trying to convey us?
Well, there's barely an issue that isn't there. I think everything to do with gender identity is something you very, very strongly see in fashion, and politics. I think protest fashion, all these things. I mean, obviously it's something that is at a very young level, but also. No, I think it's really interesting because every generation can join in that. I really do see alliances between generations, between people who lived through 1968 and who are young now, have so much in common, and I think this idea of communities is very interesting to me. Sorry, I'm just talking about life in general now. But I think that fashion exerts itself through all those things.
More questions, please. It's a good opportunity.
I just wanted to ask for maybe an overview, what you think about our work, which you saw today.
I'm sorry?
Overview of our work.
I'm not going to give you marks.
No, it's not a mark, it's just like a feeling or something.
I'm very interested in seeing work from so many nationalities here, and I think that's a strength that your class is, that of people who might not have met each other in any other circumstances. I think you're really lucky to be working in to be in a university which is affordable, and I think you might be a bit more angry. You're not as angry as other people, other students I see elsewhere. Yeah. It doesn't matter what I think, does it? I said it doesn't matter what I think, does it?
She means that it's kind of a reality that you can't change. That's what she means. But you can say whether you'll be respected or something, maybe, I don't know. Or how are we supposed to, because it does affect people, it does affect other designers. I mean, there are buyers that literally tell you, I have no space for you because I'm buying Victoria bags or whatever. There are people that this is actually happening because they do affect people's position in the market, but it's c'est la vie, right? Like, what's your opinion?
It's not something I love, but that's a very good question, yes. I'm proud to have been banned from shows in my time. People really don't like being criticised. They really don't like it. And I wouldn't say that criticism is dead at all. You've got your Diet Prada, you've got people voicing all their opinions all over the internet, haven't you? So, as far as fashion criticism is concerned, I don't know. All I know is I really can't bring myself to say something that's a lie or I don't feel it's true. I might sidestep sometimes, but for me personally, it is very, very difficult to be brutally honest now. Yeah. Hussein, what do you think about critics?
It's a really important matter. I think what he's really asking about are the advertisers who have to be pampered. That's what you're asking about. No? But that is the answer, because a lot of writers have to pamper the advertisers because of business, because they're part of the discourse, they're part of the cycle. So actually that's the reason why, because their job will be in jeopardy, but they can gently criticize them, but it's always quite forgiving. My view on criticism is that I feel, because I've been in this for so long, and my work has been written about so many times, that like if it's a constructive criticism and not just, and if it's a writer that knows you and knows your evolution and what you've done before, it's often much better because they know what you've done before. It's much more satisfying when they haven't liked something or whatever. I think there's a difference between just constructive and just often I think it's not so bad, but I think the advertising thing or what you're talking about is another matter. But I feel it's important to be able to take criticism, and it's important to be critical of yourself as well. And it's also important to not take yourself too seriously. I think a lot of people in fashion take themselves too seriously. My feeling is you should take your work seriously, but not yourself. So
that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Does everybody want a drink now?
Do you think that like making commercial pieces for your shows and everything is the only way to become successful? Because as a student, you always like creative.
Say it again.
As a student, you mostly create like very like abstract pieces, and it's not really commercial. Like it's not a shirt, you know, a simple shirt. And like you see all these young designers struggle, and I think it's partly because of that. So I'm now thinking like, is it because the people are not buying like crazy stuff anymore? What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, if you're in the fashion business, you do have to sell clothes. I mean, I do think that it takes time. When you're at university, you should put absolutely everything that you really believe into your work, because your work those ideas have a kind of long tail, and you will be able to. It's like artists. You at the beginning, the things you think, the things you make when you're very young, can sustain you through your career, and they'll become more and more refined, and you know, if you can, you know, turn them into products. So I don't think it's a good idea to start off being very compromised by thinking, will this sell on Farfetch? Does that make sense?
It does come with time. It's true. I agree.
It takes, what you've all got to know is that your time is on your side, and things, to set up a brand, it takes 5 to 10 years. Did for Helmut Lang.
Yeah, definitely. More questions, please. Last, maybe we can take maybe 2 more questions and that's it. No? Okay, so thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for coming, and I hope you enjoyed. I really enjoyed.
Thank you.